Greetings to all of you. I'm Michael Boriskin, and I'm in the studio of the National Historic Landmark home of our namesake, the iconic composer Aaron Copland. I am so delighted to welcome you to Cultivated Spaces 2.0, the virtual version of our Cultivate Emerging Composers Institute, which is an annual week-long all-scholarship creative workshop and mentoring program for gifted composers in the initial stages of their professional careers. Copland House is a singular creative center for American music whose programs embrace the entire artistic process, from creation and development to performance and preservation. And all of that is reflected in Cultivate, which is a deep dive into really honing a new piece, engaging intensively with the performers who are going to introduce the work. But it's also about ultimately communicating and projecting the piece to listeners and essentially making the piece as good as it can be, as many of our fellows have said. So I'm happy to turn now to today's featured composer fellow from 2021, Nicholas Bentz, whose Cultivate piece is called THRASH, counterTHRASH, which, as the title suggests, is about exploring extremes. Nick's going to start us off with some brief introductory remarks, and then we will hear music from Copland House's complete performance of the piece, its premiere, after which Nick will return for a short conversation with Cultivate's director, Derek Bermel. So please enjoy the piece and the performance, and I hope you will join us next week for the final program in Cultivated Spaces 2.0.
Hello, my name is Nicholas Bentz, and I'm the composer of the next piece, THRASH, counterTHRASH, for a piano trio. In working on this piece, I was very interested in what would happen if I took two very, very different textures and I sequenced them against each other. So you'll notice in this piece that we have one texture that's extremely maximal, very, very noisy, very, very loud. And it's juxtaposed against this other texture that's extremely still and very, very placid. So in writing this piece, I was very interested in the ways that the boundaries between these two textures can dissolve over time and the ways that they can sort of turn into each other over the course of the piece. I want to give a big thank you to everyone at Copland House that made this opportunity possible. This was an extremely fun piece to write. And also a huge thank you to Paula, Alexis, and Peggy for all of their amazing work in putting this piece together. They did a fantastic job, and I hope you all enjoy THRASH, counterTHRASH.
Hi, my name is Derek Bermel, and I'm the director of Copland House's Emerging Composer Institute, Cultivate. And after hearing Nick Bentz's wonderful piece, we now have a chance to talk to him a little bit about the work. And after being all ears for a moment, just like Marvin here, who's with me, whether I like it or not, we're now ready to delve in and think about it from the standpoint of the composer. So welcome, Nick.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Derek.
So thrash, counterTHRASH, as a piano trio.
Yeah.
you talked a little bit about the maximal and the minimal in your notes to the piece, and it's really audible that there's like an on switch and an off switch. But what I thought was so interesting about this piece as I listened to it again is this process of is the kind of process nature of the piece that you're trying to get us to hear things within silences in a way, or to kind of create maybe what's almost like an artificial silence, some stasis, and then have these things slowly meld as the piece goes on, and blurring those boundaries. So talk a little bit, if you want, about boundaries in music. What is it that you're trying to get us to listen for?
That's a really great question. And I feel like when I initially sort of set out the form of this piece in my head, I really was thinking about, just juxtaposing these two really, really different things against each other and seeing what they would do. And as I got deeper and deeper into the piece, I started to notice it was almost like a magic eye. If you've ever done those before, where you sort of stare into something long enough that like shapes start to come out of it. And that's sort of what I was starting to feel with like the more minimal texture. I started to really like feel like there was this like great activity that's sort of like highly compacted inside of that minimal texture. And so I was really interested in sort of exploring that. And once I started to see how this texture, this like minimal texture, wanted to sort of turn into this maximal texture, that made me think, well, what if I take the maximal texture and I try to like shove it into this really, really like minimal sort of space? And so that was really sort of the gesture that got me really thinking about those boundaries between those two really, really different textures, and how and what it sounds like when we start to blur them and when we start to really like allow them to speak to each other.
One thing that I found so interesting about this piece is that one of the main, I don't know how to talk about this, but let's say parameters that you're dealing with, just like you talk about harmony or melody or something like that as a parameter, one specific part that we kind of isolate. Here, pressure is somewhat of a parameter. It's something that the string players use, and a lot of people may not know much about something that you ask for quite a bit in this piece, which is overpressure or under pressure. And can you talk about how that plays into getting kind of evincing these textures out of the instruments?
Totally. I think when I was approaching this piece, I was really interested to speak to another parameter. I was really interested in like noise as a parameter and sort of treating it like almost something on a dial that I could turn back and forth between like pitched content and then like more noisy content. And then when I was starting to really think about the noise and the pressure, it was really sort of it felt really natural to sort of marry this like really, really harsh pressure, this overpressure that really creates this really grating sound, and really to put that inside of this more maximal texture, but then to also explore like the more like what happens if we have like a really overpressure sound that's super quiet, and just allowing the player to really use like a really, really minimal amount of bow, but with maximum pressure, and sort of seeing what sounds come out of that. And then there's also like the more like flotando or like under pressure that we have like in the later parts of the piece, as these two spaces start to really speak to each other. And so I was really interested in like the differences in sound that we can get from these various different pressures, whether it's like the really like opaque and heavy like overpressure, or this more like silky and metallic sort of under pressure.
Wow. And how do you relate to this as a performer? Because you're a very good violinist. I mean, kind of top-notch player. But here you're writing for other people. You're not playing this yourself, and you do quite a bit of performing. Here you have a kind of rock and roll aesthetic. Even the title says thrash in there, like thrash metal. So how do you go about notating this for somebody else and thinking about this as something that someone else is going to play? And what do you need to write down? What do you how do you get them into the aesthetic and this kind of noise aesthetic, this thrash aesthetic?
Yeah, I think that's a really fantastic question, because I think there's such a big debate about, how much information we should put on the page as a composer, and how much we should, leave up to the performer to discover inside of the sound. And I feel like in this piece, at least, I'm very precise about what I want, and I'm very precise, especially about like pressure and like noise. And so in my own sort of experience, I felt like I wanted to, I want to really like think about the player's psychology and really think about, what they see on the page, and try to make things as easy as I can, because I know that my music can be very difficult at times. So I try to like make things as simple as I can. And I would say that's what I'm really trying to aim for, is just a sense of facility with reading the music for the performer, and making sure that the parameters that I want can translate through the notation. So, I feel like I sort of have like an alphabet soup sort of method, where I have these like little just abbreviations that'll stand for various different parameters, and then using arrows to delineate transitions. So for instance, like scratch tone is just SCR, just for scratch. And so, very, very simple little codes that just signify like what the technique is in that instance.
Yeah, because when Marvin hears scratch, he thinks of something totally different.
Right.
He's actually a conductor, by the way. I don't know if you can tell, but he's dressed for the occasion. But I was curious how you think about, since this is chamber music, you don't need a conductor. How do you think about the piano trio? Because it's such a well-worn kind of historic ensemble, and so you have the same thing as you might have for writing a symphony, or for that matter writing a string quartet, where you're weighed down by the kind of great examples from the past, like like the Shostakovich trio, or the Brahms trios, or anything like that. So how do you kind of how do you handle that, and the weight of history there? And does the piano trio mean something special to you?
I feel like it does, because actually a piano trio was the first chamber group that I ever played in. So I feel like I have a very like intimate connection with that medium, because I feel like it was the first one of the first ensembles in which I really got to understand the communicative power of like working inside of an ensemble and really playing chamber music with other people. But yeah, definitely when I set out to write this piano trio, the first thing that was on my mind is like, there's a huge history, there's a huge weight to the medium that it can paralyze you as a creator, especially, in these forms that have such storied traditions. And so I feel like whenever I notice myself like really feeling that weight of history, what I want to do is I want to really explode like what I do know about the ensemble, and I want to find like new paths forward sonically through the ensemble. So I try not to listen to as much piano trios as I can, especially because I feel like I've heard so many of them already. I feel like there's not many more I need to know to find my own path through the medium. But it's really a way, I try to think of like turning it inside out in various different ways, and just trying to find a new path and trying to figure out what my voice sounds like through this mediation.
And how is this process working with these musicians, these particular musicians who each have their own way into the piano trio, and into dealing with new works? What was that process like, going through a week of revisions? Because I remember you made substantial revisions to your piece. You came back almost every day with a new revision.
Yeah. Yeah, I was extremely thankful to the performers. They did such an amazing job, and they put up with a lot from me with all of my revisions. But I feel like it was such a wonderful environment where I was able to, feel comfortable in making those revisions, and the performers were so expert that they took it in stride, and they really every day, like they would show this new version of the piece, and then it would just go back to the drawing board. And I think is one of the amazing things about Cultivate, is that you have that opportunity to really get into the weeds with these players about your music. and figuring out like what things work, what things don't work. Because I feel like I did take like some really big risks ultimately when I first wrote this piece, and some of them worked and some of them didn't. And it was a matter of figuring out, you know, what things work, what things need improvement, what edges can I sort of smooth out a little bit better. And it was a wonderful, wonderful environment for that.
Well, thanks for taking the time to talk about your piece, and it's great to hear your music again, and and good to get more context about your process and the way you work. So, congrats, Nick, and we'll see you soon.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Derek.